Good morning, everyone. We'll just give everyone a few minutes to join, a few seconds maybe. All right, looks like everyone's been able to hop on. So welcome everyone to the Kentucky Harm Reduction and Recovery Community of Practice webinar series, presented by Voices of Hope and the University of Kentucky College of Nursing. My name is Amanda Fallon Bennett. I'm an associate professor at the UK College of Nursing and a co-founder of Voices of Hope. The goal of a community of practice is to bring together a group of people to engage in training, share best practices, and network around a common interest. Today, the topic of our community of practice is trauma-informed approaches for peer support specialists, presented by Voices of Hope's own Brook West. Brook West is a person in recovery and the training and education manager at Voices of Hope in Lexington, Kentucky. Brook develops and facilitates presentations and workshops for recovery coaches on topics such as motivational interviewing, medications for opioid use disorder, data and documentation, and language matters, how to share your recovery story. Brook is passionate about helping peer recovery workers elevate their support skills and discover the value of caring for themselves while caring for others. A couple of housekeeping notes before we begin. If you're a peer support specialist interested in CE credit, you'll need to complete a survey that we'll put in the chat towards the end of the session. We have the chat feature on so you can participate during the webinar and ask questions. And we really do want this to be an interactive experience, so please do participate in the chat. Thank you, Brooke, for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Amanda. Good morning, everybody. Give me just a second to get my screen set up. There we go. All right. Now I just got to get my Zoom window fixed so I can see the chat. Awesome. I think I got it all together, and the chat's obviously working. So hello, everyone, and welcome to Trauma-Informed Approaches for Peer Support Specialists. Here's our funding statement. This work is supported by the CDC's Overdose to Action grant through a partnership between Voices of Hope and the Kentucky Injury Prevention and Research Center. And our learning objectives today are to understand the 3 E's concept of trauma, recognize the impact of trauma across the lifespan, describe an example of a trauma-informed approach you can adapt to your work role, and to recognize the significance of resilience. So before we get any further, let's just do a little check-in. I invite you into some self-awareness and to ask yourself, how am I feeling right now? So we're going to pause and share. If you could pick a couple of words, pick 2 words that describe how you're feeling right now and share those in the chat. Distracted. Thank you for your honesty. Nice. Confident and connected. Capable. Man, tired and grateful. Can so relate. Nice. Relaxed. Present. Thankful. Great. I love this. Thanks, everyone, for checking in. I'm feeling a little anxious. That's just how it is when I present. Also feeling very thankful to be here and to be with you all. So today we're going to be talking about trauma-informed approaches that you can apply to your work. We'll be talking about trauma, and that can evoke just a lot of thoughts and feelings. And so please bring attention to your own needs and take care of yourself however you need to during this presentation and after the presentation. And although we're talking about trauma today, we will not be processing any trauma during this presentation. So I love these cartoons from the Awkward Yeti, where all the organs in the body have like a little different personality. And I thought this one was just so appropriate for a presentation talking about trauma and being trauma informed. So what happens here is we've got heart uh, is tripped up by a minor inconvenience and is totally overwhelmed. And brain says to heart, I think you're overreacting. But what brain doesn't see is all this stuff that heart is carrying. And so being trauma informed asks us to think differently and think and consider that there might be more to the story than what we see on the surface. So although we might make that snap judgment that someone's overreacting, being trauma informed asks us to consider that there might be more going on than what we're aware of. So why is it important to be trauma informed? Especially as a peer support specialist, you are a person with lived experience of substance use and or mental health recovery, and you're helping others on their recovery journey, whatever that may look like across so many settings. So the nature of your work and just your day-to-day life brings you into contact with people who have experienced trauma. These are just some general statistics in the United States. This is from 2023 about the millions of people, 48 million people living with substance use disorder in the United States, just to show like how prevalent this is. Also mental illness in the past year, this was from 2023. There's over 58 million people in the United States with any mental illness, over 14 million people with serious mental illness. So there's just a lot of people with trauma and traumatic stress walking around out here. So we encounter a lot of people who've experienced trauma, and it's good to be trauma informed. And this is another great graphic from Bloom, Kentucky. And the Bloom, Kentucky initiative is focused on statewide policy change that aims to prevent and mitigate the impact of childhood adversity. And this image here is talking about adverse childhood experiences, which we're going to talk more about later, and just how common they are in Kentucky. So these are people who experienced in childhood these adverse experiences, like having a parent or a guardian that served time in jail, all different types of abuse and neglect. Yeah, just a lot of traumatized folks out walking around. And it's important to be trauma informed because trauma is pervasive, meaning that it's extensive, it's very common, its impact is broad, diverse, and it can be life shaping. Trauma affects how people approach services, and service systems have often been re traumatizing. So, being trauma informed and approaching people in trauma informed ways is a way to reduce the chance of re traumatizing people. So before we get any further, let's take a moment to discuss what trauma is, so that way we're all on the same page and understand what we mean by trauma. So this definition here is from SAMHSA. I think it does a pretty great job of covering all the bases. So trauma results from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's function and mental, physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. And this sets up this 3E model, the 3Es of trauma, where there's an event, something happened, then there's the experience of the event, the perception of the event, and then the effect, what happened as a result of this event. So when I was 18, I was moving to college from Colorado to Kentucky. I was driving cross country with my sister, who's a year younger than me, so she's 17 at the time. And in between Colorado and Kentucky is Kansas. It feels like Kansas lasts forever if you've ever had the privilege of driving that highway that cuts through the middle of Kansas. And so we're driving along on this long road trip, and the sky up ahead is black. And suddenly we are just under this dome of black sky, and it looks so ominous. And the wind is picking up, and rain is starting on and off, and we don't know what's happening. And this, because this is 20 years ago, we didn't have smartphones. We were driving by MapQuest directions that were printed out ahead of time. Shout out to anybody who might know what MapQuest directions are. So we turned on the radio, my sister and I, to try to learn about what weather event was coming up. And we find a radio station, and it said that there was a tornado warning for such and such county. We didn't know what county we were in, but a couple miles later, we passed the sign that said such and such county. And by now, the wind has really picked up. There's hail, and there's really no place to stop. There were a couple of underpasses, like bridges going over the road where some people were stopping, but it was just these clusters of cars. It didn't seem safe to stop, so I just kept going. And eventually, in the field right next to the highway, a tornado formed and touched down to the ground. And it looks almost identical, at least in my memory, to what is this image here on the screen, which is why I picked it for this presentation. I was terrified. I was so frightened. I didn't know how we would make it out of there. I had seen the movie Twister just a few years before, and was very afraid. But I just put my foot on the gas and kept going. And man, the hail was just pounding the windshield, and the windshield wipers were going crazy. And eventually, there was clear blue sky ahead of me, and the storm was past us, and my sister and I had made it through. I couldn't believe it. We couldn't believe that that had just happened, but we were safe. But as a result of that, as years have passed, wind is my least favorite weather. Whenever there's wind, whenever there's a thunderstorm, I am afraid. I feel very afraid. Even if there's no tornado in the forecast, I feel very anxious about windstorms, especially. So this is an example of trauma and how there's an event, the tornado, the experience. I experience a threat to my life, and it's had this effect on me where I carry this fear of tornadoes, wind, and storms. So to break this down just a little bit more, an event, a traumatic event, its events and circumstances, they may include the actual or perceived threat of death. So even if you just think you might die or experience a serious injury, physical harm, psychological harm, or sexual violation to yourself or someone close, all of those count as what could be an event that's traumatizing. And it can be a single occurrence, or it could happen repeatedly over time. And that exposure to trauma, it could be a direct experience. It could mean witnessing the event happen to others. It could mean hearing about someone else's experience, learning that a loved one was exposed to a traumatic event, or hearing repeat or extreme exposure to difficult scenarios, such as social workers and counselors repeatedly exposed to details of child abuse. So trauma can come in many different forms, many types of traumas. This is not a complete list here, but just some examples: a car accident, war, natural disaster, sexual abuse, arrest or incarceration, terrorism, race-based trauma, historical trauma, human trafficking, neglect, interpersonal violence, mass shooting, emotional abuse, bullying, intergenerational trauma, and physical abuse. So not a complete list, just these are some examples. Just to go into a little bit more detail on some of these, historical trauma is the cumulative, multi-generational collective experience of emotional and psychological injury in community and descendants. And so examples of this include forced relocation and genocide of Indigenous Americans, enslavement and torture of African Americans, extermination of Jewish people during World War II. Intergenerational trauma is the transmission of trauma or its legacy in the form of a psychological consequence of an injury or attack, poverty, and so forth, from the generation experiencing the trauma to subsequent generations. The transference of this effect is believed to be epigenetic. So intergenerational trauma can also be historical trauma. And this area of epigenetics is really fascinating because it refers to how, it refers to changes in your DNA, and how trauma can change your DNA, but it doesn't actually change the DNA sequence itself. It changes the way that your genes are expressed. So if you think of your DNA as like a piano keyboard, your genes are the keys, and epigenetics is the piano player deciding which keys are played. And so what trauma that is experienced in one generation can then be passed on to other generations. And an example of this that I find fascinating, they did this study with mice where they exposed mice to the scent of orange blossoms and then gave them an electric shock. And so this generation of mice were exposed to this scent of orange blossoms while being shocked, and then they bred those mice, and then they bred those mice again. And so now we have the grandchildren of those original mice. And when they expose those grandchildren, those grandbaby mice, to the orange blossom scent, they reacted as if they had been shocked, even though they had never been shocked before. But that is epigenetics. That is how their DNA was, their genes were expressed in a way to fear that scent of the orange blossom, which had been linked to the shock in the original mice population or the original generation. Race-based trauma or race-based traumatic stress refers to the mental and emotional injury caused by encounters with racial bias and ethnic discrimination, racism, and hate crimes. And so this, it's important to note that this is not a disorder. This is a mental injury that can occur as the result of living within a racist system and experiencing events of racism. So when you think about substance use disorder and the people that we're trying to help as peer support specialists, all the traumatic events that our participants have experienced and we've experienced ourselves and our coworkers have experienced, so many things are linked to the experience of substance use disorder, such as the chronic stress of seeking, using, and recovering from substance use, family and social dynamics, the repeated conflicts, the deterioration of relationships, the isolation, arrests, incarceration, grief and loss of significant relationships, changes in self-perception, the shame, the self-loathing, the low self-worth, overdoses, accidents, physical violence. So many traumatic events are within the lived experience of substance use disorder. So those are all the types of traumatic events. And now on to the second E, it's that experience. How did you experience that event? And the experience is unique. It's an individual perception of threat to one's self or someone close. So think about being on a roller coaster, two people riding side by side on a roller coaster. It goes up, it goes down, it does the loop-de-loops. And at the end of the ride, the two people who are sitting side by side get off the roller coaster. And one person loves it. They had a great time. They're ready to get back in line and do it again. And the person that was sitting right next to them on the same ride runs away, vomits in the bushes, swears that they will never ride another roller coaster. These people experienced the same event, but they went through the same event, but they both had very different experiences. And the same way happens with trauma. So just because you went through something and you were fine doesn't mean that the person next to you is fine. This also going back to my tornado story with my sister. My younger sister does not have that same fear of storms that I have, even though we were both in the car together. We both saw the same tornado, both had this, uncertainty of what would happen. She does not have the lasting effects of that event still impacting her life. So just to reiterate, trauma, it's a unique experience. So there may or may not be visible signs of trauma, and everyone experiences it differently. So the final E, the effect of the trauma, it's adverse, which means harmful or negative. It may be long-lasting and have impact on social, cognitive, emotional, spiritual, and physical well-being. So let's have another pause and share moment. What are some signs and symptoms of traumatic stress? So what do you think? Think about traumatic stress, what that might look like, and how you might experience that, and put that in the chat. anxiety, fear, insomnia, overwhelmed, nightmares, angry, scared. Anxiety is a favorite. Hypervigilance. Yeah, confusion. Oh, yeah. Yeah, not eating, loss of appetite, outburst. Thank you all for participating. Yeah, isolation. Absolutely. Yeah, so there's lots of signs and symptoms of traumatic stress in all sorts of different ways. So physically could be dizziness, nausea, rapid heartbeat, shortness of breath, sweating, body aches and pains. Emotional, loss of hope, anger, feeling out of control, guilt, depression, anxiety, loneliness. Mental, loss of meaning, dissociation, perfectionism, self-hatred, self-doubt, self-pity. Feeling flooded and overwhelmed. And then social and behavioral stuff, isolation, being irritable, avoidance, reliance on unhealthy coping, like gambling, overspending, restricting, or binging or purging food, substance use. So yeah, trauma can look look different. It can manifest in lots of different ways. So now we're aware of what trauma can look like, kind of, and how it's working, this event, experience, effect. So let's talk about the impact of trauma across the lifespan. And it's important to talk about the ACEs study. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study is a groundbreaking research project that examines the relationship between childhood trauma and health outcomes in adulthood. This study, which began in 1995, has been instrumental in understanding the long-term effects of ACEs on individuals and society as a whole. The ACEs study is one of the largest investigations of childhood abuse and neglect and household challenges and its link to later life health and well-being. So this adverse childhood experiences study, the ACEs study, it was a survey about 10 experiences that happened within the home before the age of 18. And this went out to 17,000 people and asked them to report on what life was like in their childhood and also report on their health outcomes as adults and how they were functioning as adults. So the 10 questions, the 10 experiences within the home before the age of 18 that they asked about were on your screen here. So there were the 3 types of abuse were asked about: physical, emotional, and sexual. There were 2 questions about neglect, physical and emotional neglect, and then 5 questions about household dysfunction. The presence of mental illness, an incarcerated relative, was the mother treated violently, was there substance use, and was there divorce? So those 10 questions, and people were scored from 0 to 10. People self-reported on their experiences. And since this original 10-question ACEs study, this has expanded into more realms of ACEs to include more circumstances in which children have adverse experiences. So there are I just want to mention that there are additional models for capturing ACEs. This is just one example. This is considered the 3 realms of ACEs. There's another one with 4 realms, but in this model, the tree is the household stuff, those original 10 questions about abuse, neglect, household dysfunction. But this model for ACEs also considers the roots of the tree, which here is community. And so these are things like food scarcity, historical trauma, discrimination, poor air and water quality, poverty. And then there's number 3, the environmental experiences that can also be traumatic, like climate crisis and tornadoes, pandemics, extreme weather events, those kinds of things. So the point of the study, though, is that what it showed, which was so shocking and just so revealing, was that the more adverse childhood experiences, the greater the risk of developing negative health outcomes later in life. And so this graph shows how the risk of negative health outcomes increases with the higher the ACE score. And so this shows this trend, especially with 4 or more ACEs. So if on that original survey you scored 4 or more, you have a greater risk of developing all sorts of things later in life, like obesity, diabetes, depression, suicide attempts, heart disease, cancer, substance use disorder, and so on. This pattern holds true for over 40 different outcomes. The exact risk values vary depending on the outcome, but there is this clear link between adverse childhood experiences and negative health outcomes in adulthood. This graph is from the Kentucky Department of Public Health and their data about Kentuckians with ACEs from 2015. And the same trends hold true where the more ACEs that you have, the greater the risk of depression, poor mental health, being a smoker. Yeah, there's this direct relationship. So ACEs in the United States, overall, 63% of US adults reported having at least one ACE, and 17% reported 4 or more ACEs. So this goes back to a lot of people who have experienced trauma and how it's impacting their health as adults. And I wanted to return to this graphic from the beginning of the presentation about how adverse childhood experiences are common in Kentucky. And I also wanted to include this slide and give a shout out to the Department of Behavioral Health, Developmental and Intellectual Disabilities and their trauma-informed care Train the Trainer. It is a great free resource to learn more about trauma-informed care and how to do their training, which goes into way more depth in this presentation and has a much broader scope, but it's a really amazing resource. I think they do the Train the Trainer quarterly. And this slide from their presentation really stood out to me, that there is a stronger link between childhood trauma and substance use than there is between obesity and diabetes. Okay, so now let's talk about what's going on inside the brain and the body when we're experiencing stress. So we're going to walk through this brain body stress response. And this is something that is happening automatically. So when you perceive a threat or you feel like you're in danger, this is what your body does. And you're not having to think about it. This is just how we are wired to react. So first, in your brain, the amygdala, it's the alarm system. It perceives that there's a threat, it perceives that there's danger, and the alarm system sounds. Then that signals the hypothalamus, which is the body's regulator or thermostat. It says, hey, we need to adjust the settings on the body so we can prepare to respond to this threat and this danger. And then that sends the signal to the pituitary gland, which sends this hormone surge to get things moving in the body. And that then signals to the adrenal glands, which are on top of the kidneys, to release adrenaline and cortisol. Your heart rate goes up, blood pressure increases, your breathing rate increases because your body is getting ready to either fight what's in front of you or run from what's in front of you. More on that on the next slide. And all the while, your prefrontal cortex is impaired. You're unable to think because all of this is happening automatically. You're not really having conscious thoughts. And then lastly, the hippocampus is filing the memory of this event, this danger, this threat, but it may encode the memory in an unorganized way. This is really great when, you're walking in the woods and you encounter a bear and all of this response happens. So you can respond to this danger. The problem is when that bear comes home every night and you are repeatedly exposed to this stress response and how this erodes your health. So that's what's going on inside the brain and the body. Let's think about what it looks like on the outside. And I think a lot of us have heard of fight or flight or fight, flight, freeze. I've got 3 more to add to the list. So we've got 6 Fs here as options for how we respond to trauma. So fight is this response involves engaging in the attack. You know, you're ready to fight. It can be physical, it can be verbal, and it's just an instinctive reaction. All of these are. You're not thinking, should I fight this time or should I flight this time? Something else takes over. Your brain, your that whole system kicks in and you don't get a choice in how you're going to respond. And then there's flight, and the flight response involves literally or symbolically escaping a threat. So it could be truly running away or it could be avoidance. So just not wanting to think about something, not wanting to feel something, just avoiding the situation. The freeze response occurs when one becomes overwhelmed, leading to a state of numbness or paralysis. It is typically a momentary pause where the next course of action is not immediately clear. So, just what it sounds like, being frozen. Fawning. This response is a psychological reaction where one tries to appease traumatic stimuli in an effort to make it stop. This often involves accommodating a perpetrator or abuser. So, this is like waiting on someone. Like, you don't want to make them mad, so you just want to do whatever you need to make them happy to avoid an outburst or something negative or overwhelming. So that's fawning. Fainting is what it sounds like. It's fainting. Losing consciousness, it's a physical reaction to trauma that is caused by a sudden drop in heart rate. And then I think the most common one, the one that I hear all the time, is fine. I'm fine. I'm okay. This response involves denying or downplaying the impact of trauma in an attempt to convince oneself that everything is okay. So, yeah, I'm fine, or it's not a big deal. Those kinds of things that are really dismissive. Oh, I see in the chat here. Thank you, Rebecca. Can't wait to inform my husband that his "this is fine" response is as much a trauma response as my freeze. Yes, Rebecca, take that and run with it. So again, this is happening automatically. It's not like we get to choose our own adventure here. These are our trauma responses. So when we think about the brain and energy allocation when it's regulated, so like when we're doing well, when we're calm, when we're not under any threat of danger, notice that we have all the energy for cognition, meaning we can think about things, we can reflect on things. We're not spending a lot of our energy on survival. So we're just not having to, we're safe, we're okay. So we can have higher levels of thinking. And then when we're experiencing harm, the brain energy allocation is much different, where all of our energy is sent to survive our survival mode. We're focused on survival. We don't have a lot of energy for cognition, um, emotional reflection. And so when we think about this with the population you serve, and a lot of people that are in survival mode who we meet, so they might not be safe enough or regulated enough to think about their emotions or their behavior patterns or cognitive distortions, or because I'll hear that sometimes, like, I don't know why they can't see like their negative behavior patterns when someone's frustrated, maybe with a participant or a client. But if they're in survival mode, they don't have they don't have the energy for cognition to like reflect on. It looks like we have a hand up. Gina, did you want to say something? I don't know if Amanda can get you off mute, or Gina, if you could just put it in the chat. Gina, you can come off mute if you want to ask your question. Oh, didn't mean to. Okay, no worries. But hey, good to see you, Gina. I'm glad you're here. So let's return to brain and heart, shall we? And how trauma impacts how we respond to stress. So, trauma significantly reduces a person's tolerance for stress, leading to a narrower window of tolerance. And I'll talk more about that on the next slide, where they can function effectively. So, this means that individuals who have experienced trauma may be more easily overwhelmed by stressful situations and may experience intense emotional and physical reactions. So, it looks like here poor little heart carrying all this stuff, the past trauma, the bad news, the stress, the pandemic, all that, and then that little butterfly on top, has a small window of tolerance and could not tolerate the minor inconvenience. So things like even everyday stress, like traffic, work deadlines, household chores, like it can appear like a minor thing that you should be okay with or your clients or participants should be okay with, but then this sense of overwhelm can occur when we don't have a very large window of tolerance, when we have a narrow window of tolerance. Okay, so a lot happening here on this slide. So let's focus on the middle section, this window of tolerance and that nice, wonderful kind of mountain lake view. This is where we want to be. The window of tolerance is a concept in mental health that refers to the optimal zone where an individual can function effectively and manage stress. So when you're in the window of tolerance, everything feels right. You're able to cope with life. You feel calm, but not tired. You feel alert, but not anxious. So we want to be within that window. But outside that window, when we are stressed, when we have trauma, we can have a narrower window, and then we are um, at greater risk of experiencing hyperarousal or hypoarousal. So hyperarousal is the fight or flight, and the hypoarousal arousal is the freeze. So this is where our emotions are getting out of control. So the hyperarousal is when you're extremely anxious, angry, and you just have that out of control feeling, easily overwhelmed. And yeah, you want to fight or you want to run. And then the hypoarousal is the extreme zone out, feeling numb. You might get a sense that time is vanishing and like you're just like frozen emotionally and physically. And so we want to increase our window of tolerance, and we can do that by building resilience. It will widen the window. We'll talk more about resilience in a little bit, but that stress and trauma shrinks that window. Now that we know how common trauma is and how it impacts the ability to cope with stress, how it affects the brain and everything, we can shift our perspective to a trauma informed point of view. And this is what being trauma informed is all about. It's having this new point of view where we consider that there might be more to the story. And so I'm going to call this, and I didn't make this up, this is a thing out there. We are going to call this new point of view wearing our trauma glasses. So imagine you have your new glasses, you're seeing a situation through a new lens of being trauma informed. And we're going to do a couple of exercises to practice wearing our trauma glasses. So just for a second, everything I've said about trauma leading up to this, forget about all that, just for a second. And consider this image. What is your first impression of the person who lives here? What assumptions do you make about the person who lives here? Slob. Mhm. Hoarder, depressed, anxious. I can tell some of you guys are already trauma informed and you don't know how to take the glasses off, and that's great. Chaos, teenage son. Clutter, dirty, lazy. Yeah. David, the ex-wife who looked in my bedroom. You all crack me up. Out of control. Okay. So yes, lazy, disrespectful. I don't think disrespectful came up. Unorganized, careless. Okay. So let's return back to all of our new information about trauma and being trauma informed and put on our trauma glasses. Knowing what we know about trauma. Now, what do we think about the person who lives here? Yeah, I wouldn't say lazy. I would say overwhelmed. Yeah. Depressed, abused. sad, preoccupied, overwhelmed, isolated, stuck. She's got a lot going on, depressed. Yeah, a lot of depressed and overwhelmed. Oh, doesn't feel like it's their home. Okay, maybe sick. These are all great. Yeah, so we want to think about this a little differently. You know, they're overwhelmed. Maybe they don't have the skills to clean. Maybe they don't know how to organize. Maybe they don't know where to start. Maybe they've never been taught. Could be depressed, have loss of energy, loss of motivation. So this is what we're doing, being trauma informed. We think there might be more to the story. So to look past a snap judgment we might make and instead think about what else could be going on. But I do just want to give this word of caution that being trauma informed asks us to shift our perspective and consider there might be more to the story, but we are not making a diagnosis. We just because it looks like depression doesn't mean we're diagnosing somebody with depression or ADHD or whatever it might be. So we're just curious, and we're curious that there might be more than what meets the eye, what's on the surface. So just a quick reminder about the role of the peer support is that you're not a doctor or nurse, you're not a counselor or therapist, lawyer, priest, clergy, family member. Peers don't diagnose, assess, treat, or see the person as a case or give professional advice in the context of being a person who's licensed to diagnose and treat substance use disorder or mental illness. But you are a person in recovery sharing your lived experience, and you're being a role model for recovery behaviors. So just that little word of caution there about remember your role. Let's do one more with our trauma glasses off. Let's consider this case study. So trauma glasses off. You are the house manager at a recovery residence. Ashley has been a resident for 2 months and is having a hard time adjusting to the house rules. Ashley has already received 2 formal warnings and told she will have to leave the property if she continues to disregard the rules. You have been patient and understanding with her until one day she breaks a rule for the 3rd time. You must follow protocol, telling Ashley to leave the residence, and you suggest other housing resources. Ashley says, "If you don't let me stay here, then I'm going to kill myself." What do we think about this behavior with our trauma classes off? Manipulative, rude, drama queen. Attention seeking. Think she's just kidding. Entitled, juvenile. Victim, pushing boundaries. Yeah, so this is feel sorry for me. Yeah, that attention seeking behavior, not used to being held accountable. Yeah, so with our trauma glasses off, we can see this as, she's being immature, dramatic, manipulative, all those things. So now with our trauma glasses on, thinking that there might be more to the story, what might be going on instead? Fear, abandonment issues. She's scared. Impulsive. This may be her last hope. Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of compassion. When we have our trauma-informed glasses on, we have access to a lot more compassion. Seeking to feel in control. So it is important when someone does threaten suicide that you take it seriously. At Voices of Hope, we do the QPR training, the question, persuade, refer training. Even if it feels manipulative to you, if that's your first impression, it's manipulative or it's attention seeking. you still want to take it seriously. Could be that cry for help. Um, and ask them about, are they considering suicide? Do they have a plan? Persuade them to stay alive, and then refer them to additional help, refer them to professional help, give them the 988 crisis number. So you do want to take any threat of suicide seriously. And we want to think about this situation where this is a person just trying to get her needs met. She's doing what's necessary to survive. And this is just what has likely worked for her in the past. You still want to take the threat of suicide seriously. And so let's look at this table where, with our trauma glasses off, how something might appear manipulative, just like in this case scenario. It could be their way of getting their needs met in a way that's worked for them in the past, and they're trying to survive. When someone appears lazy, it could be that they're overwhelmed and they lack the skills, and they don't know where to start. If they appear resistant, it could be that they don't have any trust. They're mistrustful of others due to their history of being hurt by others, scared to make progress and then lose it. If someone appears to be unmotivated or they just don't care, it could be that they're depressed or anxious. They could be frozen and in that state of overwhelm. And with being disrespectful, they could feel unsafe. They could feel really vulnerable. They could feel like they're in danger. And the attention seeking could be this feeling of disconnect. They really are wanting to connect, and they don't really know another way to get their needs met. They're feeling unheard, and they're just looking for that connection. Things to consider while you're working with your clients and participants. So this transition from not trauma informed to trauma informed looks like making shifts, like instead of saying what's wrong with you, ask what happened to you. Instead of this idea that people just need to be fixed first, instead people need to feel safe first. They need their safety. Instead of thinking people make bad choices, it's people who feel unsafe do unsafe things. And instead of thinking of there's a right way and a wrong way to do things, consider multiple viewpoints. And instead of blaming or shaming someone for their behavior, respect them for where they are, respect them as a person. And instead of imposing treatment, offer choices, whenever possible. So this presentation is about trauma-informed approaches. And to this point, you're now more informed about trauma. But we need to, now that we know things about trauma and what it means to be trauma-informed and how it's impacting people, we need to now adjust to how we do things. How do we integrate what we know into how we do things? And for this, we're going to refer to the 6 principles of trauma-informed care. And these are outlined by SAMHSA. And we're going to walk through each of these and talk about things you can do in your role for each principle. And also, I'm going to give motivational interviewing tips for each of these. So hopefully you can take these away and implement them in your role in the conversations that you're having. So this first principle of trauma-informed care is safety. And this is physical and psychological safety. And so how do we make people feel safe? One way is to give them a private space to meet with the client participant. You just want them in a safe area. Ask what their seating preference is. Some people want to sit where they can view the door, or they're close to the door so they can leave when, easily if they want to. Is the room comfortable temperature-wise? And also no loud noises, no noise pollution. Use their chosen name and pronouns. Can you give them any harm reduction materials or resources, anything to promote safer practices? And this came up in a training from one of our coaches that works at a detention center about PREA considerations, which is the Prison Rape Elimination Act, and that training that focuses on preventing, detecting, and responding to sexual abuse and harassment within correctional facilities. Also, passive communication for de-escalation. So if someone is escalating, if someone is getting aggressive, being passive and saying, okay, whatever you need, that's okay. Just going along with whatever the situation is to try to de-escalate the situation and maintain that sense of safety. So a motivational interviewing tip for safety is this motivational interviewing shift. And this is a shift from feeling responsible for changing the speaker's behavior to supporting them and thinking and talking about their own reasons for change. So in the context of a peer support specialist working with a client or a participant, the peer support specialist, we're not responsible for the outcome. Like we don't whatever the client or participant what they choose to do, what they think, we just don't have any control over that outcome. But what can we control? What are we responsible for? And this is how we show up. And so as a peer support, you are responsible for being present, calm, and approachable and having a demeanor that reads as safety and having a welcoming environment that is safe and also your own self-care. So you're taking care of yourself so that way you're not burned out. You're not showing up to work irritable. So you can give people the highest quality of care when they come to seek services. So it's that shift in thinking about what am I responsible for, and we are responsible for how we show up. The next principle is trustworthiness and transparency, and this involves relationships, operations, and decisions. And so while you're working with your client or participant, you want to clearly communicate the process. Let them know what forms there are to fill out. What time are we meeting? What location? How frequently am I going to are we going to speak? What's our hours of operation? How you can reach me? And any forms related to confidentiality. You're being transparent about the process. You're being open about the process. And this is how we build trust, by letting them know what to expect. So the motivational interviewing tip for this is this foundational process of MI, which is engagement. And so motivational interviewing happens in the context of a relationship, which is two people working together. And so engaging the participant is what starts the process. So how do you engage that initial conversation? You're laying out the groundwork for, this is how we're going to meet. This is what to expect. These are the forms. But another important step of the engagement process is to set your boundaries. You're explaining how the process works, but you also need to let them know that you're not a doctor, you're not a lawyer, counselor, sponsor, family member, but explain what your role is and how you can assist them within the process. And that's critical for that foundational engagement with the people you serve. The next principle is peer support. And man, your peer support, your story of lived experience with substance use and or mental health recovery, like, is your greatest source of hope and connection with your participants. And you use that to provide hope, promote safety, trust, collaboration, and voice. And you want to strategically share your story. You don't want to make it all about you. You still want to focus on the person that you're working with. And you also want to check in on your coworkers. They're also people with lived experience, um, and create this environment of support and safety. And the MI tip for this is do not equate your experience. So while you're working with someone, you have your lived experience, they have their lived experience. You want to avoid saying, I know exactly how you feel. You don't claim to know how someone feels. Because remember that second E in the trauma concept is experience. And we all experience trauma differently. So maybe they lost a parent and you lost a parent. Maybe they were incarcerated and you were incarcerated, but it doesn't mean you know exactly how they feel. So don't assume, don't claim to know that. So instead, ask more questions, ask how you're doing, and reflect. Like, that sounds difficult. Of course, we can relate to the same feelings of hope or hopelessness, or we can relate to feeling afraid, like those common emotions we can relate to, but you don't want to claim to know like, oh yeah, I know exactly how you feel. But yes, you can say, I relate to that. Absolutely. You just don't want to make it equal, your experience equal to the other person. Another principle of trauma-informed care is collaboration and mutuality. This levels the power differentials and values all roles. So this includes working with other community organizations, and knowing what resources the clients need, help the participant identify their own goals and meet people where they are. So we're working together. We're trying to level the power differential. We're trying to be on the same level and value everyone's roles. So for this, I would recommend reflection statements for your MI tip. And this is how you check that you understand the other person. And also reflection statements help people feel seen, heard, and valued. And that feeling of being seen and heard is what helps people have a positive experience with services. And so reflections are statements that start with things like your concern is that, your fear is that, it sounds like, it seems that, and then you're reflecting back what they've said to you. And you're checking that you understand how it is, whatever it is that they're feeling or expressing. The next principle is empowerment, voice, and choice. And this promotes resilience, healing, and recovery. And this includes doing things like validating their feelings and don't cause harm. Not causing harm includes doing your own self-care work and being a role model for the transformative power of recovery. And you want to empower them to make their own decisions. Give them choice whenever possible. And I think this is where affirmations are really important, this motivational interviewing tip. So an affirmation is not cheerleading. It's not you got this. It's actually emphasizing a specific strength. It instills a can-do attitude, and it's very sincere and specific. And so not the cheerleading stuff, but you want to uplift a positive character trait. So these are things like saying you're a resourceful person. That took a lot of courage. You're capable of change. Looks like a question came through the chat. I'm going to look real quick. I have found myself in conversation where someone will say, you know how I feel because you've been there too. I always make sure to share that I know how I felt, but I don't know how you feel. And then follow that up with asking the person to share their feelings with me. Yes, I think that's great. We can meet on common ground and understand, like, I felt despair in this situation, or I recognize this in you, or yeah, we can relate to each other. But yeah, I don't want to claim to know precisely how someone feels because everyone experiences things differently, and it's great to show that curiosity. Oh, sorry, lost my mouse. I got it back. But thank you for your question. So the next principle is cultural, historical, and gender issues. So this counters stereotypes, bias, historic racism, and other power imbalances. This includes doing things like radical acceptance. You want to meet people where they are, which can be so hard because we really do want people to change for the better. And by the better, I mean healthier, safer. We want people to live, but we have to accept people just where they are in their journey. You want to be aware of historical, intergenerational, and race-based trauma, that those are things people experience. You want to use preferred pronouns, have cultural humility. And cultural humility is where you don't claim to know everything about every culture. You're humble, you're curious, you're willing to ask, tell me more about that. And just know that there might be parts about someone's culture that you're not aware of, that might be in play in the scenario. And you want to use person-centered language. I think this is where open-ended questions is really important. And open-ended questions open the door to more conversation. So they cannot be answered with a yes or no. Instead, they start with words like what, where, how, why, and tell me. So just a couple examples. A closed-ended question would be, did you even want a job? And an open-ended question is, how does it feel to be back at work? Another example, closed, is, have you thought about trying something different? And an open-ended question is, tell me about your goals. You can feel the difference between closed-ended questions and the open-ended questions. And I think we need to add 3 words to our just daily conversations, which is tell me more. I think tell me more is such an important question. Tell me more about what matters to you. Tell me more about your goals. Tell me more about your values, and be curious about the other person. Um, and that will hopefully get them talking and get them exploring what their goals are and what motivates them. Any questions about those principles or any of the MI tips that I've given so far? Don't see anything else in the chat. Okay. Now for a bit of good news. Trauma is not destiny. Talking about trauma is heavy, and I think, you know, especially talking about the adverse childhood experiences and how that impacts your health later in life, it can suggest that trauma will just never go away and people can never heal. But good news, trauma is not destiny. We do have the capacity to heal, and we can rewire our brains, and we can build resilience. So another pause and share moment. I want you to reflect and think about, when was the last time you changed a habit, and describe the experience. Was it easy or was it difficult? And put that in the chat. No, that's not a quick thing to type out, so I'll give you all a minute. Let me know about the last time you changed a habit and how was that for you? Very hard, yes. Quitting smoking, easier than I expected. Congratulations, Ryan. Ooh, hard to stop drinking coffee. Stop drinking pop. Folding laundry as soon as it came out of the dryer, my hero. Wow. Oh, try not to buy sweets at the grocery store. That is hard. Quit smoking. It was challenging. It helped that you had bronchitis. It's hilarious. Um, yeah, eating better. And I hear that one a lot. It can be really, really difficult. Ooh, changing the wake up time. Yeah, that is a challenge. Lots of eating more veggies, trying to eat healthier and quit smoking. I'm sorry. I'm laughing at Angela and the nicotine pouches. I've had Angela in training before. I hear you, Angela. I see you. Oh, drinking just water. Yes, everyone drink more water. Okay, but it is possible. Oh, trying not to check my phone so often. That is so hard for me. Thank you, Kevin. I've got to stop scrolling. I can really go. I can just time evaporates when I'm scrolling. Yeah. Okay. So, and I imagine a lot of people here have changed a major habit, which is you've changed your relationship with substances. I have. That was the biggest habit I have ever changed. Um, but we can do this throughout our lives. We have the ability to rewire our brain. And this is neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity refers to the brain's remarkable ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. This lifelong capacity for change allows the brain to adapt in response to new experiences, learning, and even in the face of injury. It's the brain's way of rewiring itself to compensate for damage or to optimize its function based on new information and skills. So it isn't always easy and it takes time, but change does happen. So whenever I hear someone say like, well, that's just who I am, or things like I can't meditate. Oh, I'm just not good at meditating. Okay, but you have the ability to rewire your brain. You could become good at it with consistency over time and repetition. That's the word I was looking for. So that's good news. We can develop new habits. And I also want to talk about positive childhood experiences. Whew, because I think we need a little bit more hope. I don't think I fully convinced all of you that trauma is not destiny. So there was also a positive childhood experiences study, which looked at 7 questions related to positive childhood experiences. In addition to looking at the adverse, those harmful childhood experiences, but the 7 positive childhood experiences that were examined were in 2 categories: the family at home and school and community. And so positive PCEs include feeling able to talk with your family about your feelings, uh, felt that their family stood by them during difficult times, felt safe and protected by an adult in their home, felt a sense of belonging in high school, felt supported by friends, had at least 2 non-parent adults who took genuine interest in them, and enjoyed participating in community traditions. And so this survey went out to, I think this original study was in 2019. It was to 6,000 adults in Wisconsin who participated in this study, and they reported on their past history and their positive childhood experiences and their current health and functioning. And what they discovered overall, there is a dose response. The more positive experiences, the better the adult outcome. So the more positive childhood experiences that you have, the healthier you are later in life. And PCEs can mitigate the negative mental health impact of ACEs in adulthood. So that means the positive childhood experiences can make ACEs, those adverse or harmful experiences, less severe, less serious, or less painful. And positive childhood experiences are critical for positive mental health, even in the absence of ACEs. So having no positive childhood experiences may result in more negative mental health than the presence of ACEs. Kind of hard to wrap my mind around that. But if you have no positive childhood experiences, it can be so damaging on your mental health and can really create just a negative impact, right? And so this, when I learned about this has really inspired me to consider the children in my life, my friends' kids, my nieces and nephews. And I'm going to go back to one slide in that second segment. And being one of those non-parent adults who takes genuine interest in them. This learning about this has really empowered me to just try to demonstrate a strong interest in the kids in my life and their hobbies, what they enjoy, and just try to connect with them and be that non-parent adult who's supportive and accepting. I just accept them for who they are, knowing that that how powerful these positive childhood experiences are. I'm looking at the chat. I've seen some things come through. Are there any universal PCEs in the same way there are ACEs? I'm not sure. Rebecca, I'll look into that. Okay. Rebecca, email me so I remember that. Sorry, distraction. My squirrel brain. So yeah, so positive childhood experience is so powerful. Looking at the time. Okay, I think we're gonna make it. So let's talk about resilience. This came up earlier, talking about the window of tolerance, and resilience is so important. So the resilience is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. So imagine you're going on a raft trip down a river. So big river, you're in a raft, and the water is calm, but you know that up ahead there will be rapids, that there will be turns, there will be harsh water. You're aware of that. that it could happen. And so how do you prepare for that? How can you safely cross those rough waters and handle it, any unexpected problems that may come up? Um, well, you could invite a more experienced rafter on your ride. You can prepare your materials. You can have an extra life jacket, or maybe you buy a raft that's even stronger to handle the stress of the water. But you surround yourself with the right tools and the right support to make sure that you can handle the raft ride down this water. And this is how we think about resilience. Um, because there will be challenges ahead. It's inevitable. Stress is inevitable. So you know that no matter what, no matter where you are in your journey, that there will be something that you encounter. So how do you prepare for those rough waters in life that are ahead of you? And you can do things like work on building your resilience. It sounds simple, but man, it can be so hard to put into practice, especially when you don't have these habits form and you're having to form a new habit. But do things like connecting, prioritizing relationships, joining a group, accepting help, wellness, care for your physical body, mindfulness, avoid negative coping skills. Man, all this stuff's easier said than done, but so, so worth it to help us deal with stress. Healthy thinking, learning from the past. Sometimes I wish I did that a little bit faster. Accept change, zoom out from your perspective, optimistic outlook, meaning reflect on purpose, make own discoveries about yourself. Like, who am I? Help others, proactively make and work toward goals. So back to this window of tolerance we talked about earlier, building resilience can widen the window and just helps us have the ability to cope with stress, to help us deal with whatever the rough waters ahead, may look like. And so we want to open this window. We want to have that space within us where everything feels right, where we can cope with life. We're calm, not tired, not anxious. So working on these types of things will build resilience. So many things you can do. I mean, I think mindfulness is really important. It's this psychological process that involves paying attention to the present moment without judgment. So you're fully aware, or trying to be fully aware, of your own thoughts and feelings and the sensations in your body and your surroundings. So many of these are just important to just build that resilience, help us cope with stress. And like I was saying earlier, stress is inevitable. So it's going to happen. If you have never experienced adversity and you think you're doing well in your life, it doesn't mean you're resilient. It means that you're lucky, because there will be adversity. It's a fact of life. And everyone has the capacity to become more resilient with the proper support and tools. So if you want to head downriver in your old canoe that's got a hole in the side of it, that's your prerogative. You can do that. I'm imagine Clint giving me boat and fishing tips right right now. But we can improve our support and improve our tools, and we can grow and nurture our resilience. So I'm giving everybody some resilience homework. Write this down. I'm going to make you journal. I'm giving you homework that I will never collect and I will never check. But I want you to think about a time when you overcame a difficult or stressful situation. So don't worry about this now. This is your homework. You do this on your own time. But think about what personal strengths or resources helped you through it. And think about how you could apply those same strengths in your current work or personal challenges. Because if you're listening in on this today, I imagine you have already exercised a lot of resilience in your life, and you can continue to grow that resilience. And so this homework is to help you see that you have this agency. You're already doing it, and you can continue to do it. So a little reminder on self-care as wrapping up this presentation, and we'll have time for questions if anybody has those. So start typing those out. And I can see that Amanda's already put the link for our the webinar survey in the chat. Just a note to that. There will be another survey at the end of on my last slide. I'll explain that more in a second. I'm getting ahead of myself. But the last thing I want you to do before the surveys is to take care of yourself and to think about how we're engaging in self-care. There are self-care strategies that I think are important, but they kind of can take us away from our discomfort. They can be used to distract us from our feelings. Now, sometimes, I need to, just lay in bed and watch Star Trek Voyager and rest. And that's something I need. But I'm not actively working through my feelings when I do that. So it's important to also have self-care activities that make us lean into what we're thinking and feeling and try to metabolize that. Try to work out our thoughts and feelings. And so these are things like physical activity to help us metabolize the physiological stress response, to work that out of the body. Express your thoughts and feelings through journaling, creating art, or talking with someone else. And if you're listening today and you feel like you're impacted in ways that feel way bigger than what journaling and a walk could handle, then talk to a professional. I think that's so important. It's been a really important part of my journey. I've learned so much about myself, but to think of self-care as a way to work through these thoughts and feelings. So please take this survey also. So there's 2 surveys happening, one for the Community of Practice webinar, and there's this survey for Kiprick. And this training was made in partnership with Kiprick, and this is for their data collection. Very important to our work together. And let me see, I could also put this link in the chat if it's not already. Oh, it looks like Leah also put that link in the chat. Awesome. So we've got 2 links happening, the Kiprick link, which I'm sharing on the screen, the QR code, and then the link that Amanda also put in the chat. Yes. Oh, and I'm glad Amanda also mentioned in the chat that the archive of our webinar recordings are now available on the Voices of Hope website. Sorry, Amanda, if you were about to say that. But that link is also in the chat if you want to look at past recordings.
So thank you, first of all, Brooke, for that wonderful training. It took a lot away, especially the trauma glasses and the positive childhood experiences. It's really nice to know that there's a path forward despite whatever you might have experienced in childhood. So that was great. And thank you all for coming. We really love having you all each month for our Kentucky Harm Reduction and Recovery Community of Practice. So we'll leave it open just a couple more minutes in case anyone is still grabbing any of the links. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm going to check the chat for any questions. Yes, a list of references did flash by. I will go back to it. And there's so much good material out there. If this has interest you, there's so much research is being done on trauma, so many great books out there. The resources are aplenty. Yeah, so Michael, we will be sharing this PowerPoint. It will be listed. I think it'll be published on the Kiprick site. My last presentation I made for them, the Self-Care Boundaries Empowerment training, is also available through the Kiprick site. I don't have that link at my fingertips, but this will be available. You can also email me if you have questions, if you want to request a training. That's my email, brook.west@voicesofhopelex.org. Thank you, Leah. It will be on Kiprick's site in the future, and we will share it far and wide. So glad you all were here today. You guys were a wonderful audience. Thank you for your participation. I really appreciate it.